Chapter 29. "Perhaps I was meant to find this," said Ben as he handed the key of origins back to Molly. She took it slowly and placed it around her neck. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "I saw a vision," he said. "I saw Michael." Molly raised an eyebrow in curiosity. She was still shaking a bit from the shock and the cool air hitting her moist skin. Though her hands and feet felt uncomfortably cold, the cool seemed to relieve the searing pain from the brands that the demon worshippers had used to torture her. "I think we need to find the other key bearers," continued Ben. "The archdemon is alive, and only the power of all the divine keys will be enough to finally destroy him." "If we destroy him, what will happen to Archdemon's hand?" asked Molly. "I can't say for certain," said Ben, "but that was exactly what Michael sacrificed himself to accomplish." The word sacrificed felt like a needle going into Molly's chest. She breathed deeply to try and mask her discomfort. Ben did not seem to have noticed as he continued speaking. "He gave his life to make these divine keys so that others could finish what he could not," said Ben. "So do you know where the archdemon is?" asked Molly. "Somewhere far in the south," said Ben. "That's it?" asked Molly, hoping for something more specific. "That's the best I can do. That's one of the reasons we need the other key bearers." "Why not just Lincoln Thomas?" asked Molly. "He has Heaven's sword. Surely you would not need me or the others, right?" "Of course I would need you," said Ben as he pulled her close. She feigned a smile and put her head against his shoulder as he held her. As she felt his large, warm arms around her, she closed her eyes. She wanted to put all of her doubts and fears aside and enjoy his presence. A tear ran down her cheek as the awful memory of seeing the demon worshippers being consumed by the energy of their own human sacrifices haunted her. Something felt terribly wrong. "I need all of the council. There is something that I must ask of them," said Ben. "Something that humanity must ask of them." His abstract thoughts were confusing and frightening, and Molly decided she did not want to discuss it any more that night. They had gone for too long without sleep, and she hoped that her fears would subside with the sunrise. "Well, we won't be finding anyone tonight," said Molly as she feigned a smile. Ben sighed. "Yes, you're right," he said softly. "Let's find some shelter and get some rest." Molly led Ben to a small gathering of trees where she had rested the night before she had intended to take her own life. The trunks arched over an opening at the bottom. She had needed to muster her courage and kill the spiders that lived there, but she had determined not to die by such a horrific method as a spider bite. She had thrown some branches over the trunks and then layered smaller branches, leaves, and pine needles until a makeshift roof had been created. Her shelter seemed only slightly damaged as they approached. It had probably been affected by the earthquakes that had been set off when Molly made contact with Ben's divine key. Ben quickly pushed fallen branches back up into a more stable position, and they both worked on filling the gaps in the roof. After a few minutes, the shelter appeared to be adequately repaired, and they crawled under the roof. Pine needles and leaves softened the ground of the shelter, and Ben retrieved a blanket from his pack to add additional warmth and comfort as they slept. The sun was shining when Molly got up. She immediately discovered that Ben was missing. She looked around and slowly poked her head out of the shelter. She could not help but smile as she saw him casting out his fishing lure as he waded in the lake. She decided she would gather some berries and herbs again, hoping that a good breakfast would help everything become clear. After an hour of gathering, she came back to the shore. Ben was cooking the fish in his pan, and the smell made her mouth water. She ran toward him, and he smiled widely. "Here," said Ben, "have a bite." He retrieved the fish from the pan and handed his fork to Molly. She smiled and cut a small piece of fish. Steam floated above the meat as she gently blew on it to cool it. Finally, she put it in her mouth. Perhaps it was her hunger, but the flavor was wonderful. She closed her eyes and smiled as she chewed. Ben laughed. "I'm glad you like it," said Ben. "Here," said Molly as she handed the fork to Ben. "Try it." Ben cut a piece of fish and ate it. He smiled. "That did turn out well, didn't it?" he said with a smile. He handed the fork back to Molly, and she quickly cut another bite. "So do you remember how we were talking about sacrifice?" asked Ben. Molly nodded, hoping that she would finally have clarification. "I think that we were chosen to be divine key-bearers because we are willing to sacrifice," said Ben. The way he said the word sacrifice made Molly's stomach knot up. "I think that means our sacrifices have more power than those of the demon worshippers. The fact that we are willing sacrifices, the fact that we put others above ourselves. I always thought it was because we did not sacrifice others," said Molly softly, "because we had a sense of moral duty. A moral duty that compels you to do the right thing, even when it is difficult," said Ben excitedly. "A moral duty that persuades you to put other interests above your own." Molly could not help but think of the other key-bearers. They had not gone to particularly great lengths to include her, and she had concluded that they were better off without her, but she had to admit that she felt a compulsion to protect them from being sacrificed. "That is the price of the power we are given," said Ben. "We tip the balance and provide the power necessary to defeat the archdemon." "And then no one is left to stop Archdemon's hand," said Molly. "We need to trust that Michael has that figured out," said Ben. "He spoke of one who would appear as he does. He spoke of remaining vigilant. He wanted me to convince you and the others of the importance of this sacrifice. Those were his last words to me, Molly." There was an awkward pause as Molly looked into Ben's eyes. Finally, Molly nodded. Ben smiled, but it was because he believed he had convinced her to help him. He was worried about having to convince the others, as he felt uncomfortable with speeches. Molly had not nodded because she agreed with Ben. Molly had determined that Ben had been seduced by some demonic power, and that she was the one who could stop him from hurting anyone else. It was with conviction for her next actions that she nodded sincerely. She reached into the pocket on her dress and carefully removed the stopper and the vial of poison she had intended for herself. With her free hand, she took another bite of fish and then handed the fork back to Ben. "I'm glad you understand, Molly," said Ben. "I was so worried that you might think I'd gone crazy." Ben took another bite of fish and handed the fork back to Molly. She took one more bite and closed her eyes, savoring the flavor. Finally, she handed the fork back to Ben. "I almost forgot," exclaimed Molly. "I picked up some more berries and herbs." She reached into her pocket and concealed the poison vial in her hand as she retrieved some herbs and berries from another pocket. Ben smiled as he looked at the morning breeze catch a few locks of Molly's hair. He did not notice the green fluid soaking into the fish and covering the food. "Thank you," said Ben. "Don't thank me until you've tried it," said Molly. Ben smiled and took a piece of fish as well as several berries and leaves and placed them in his mouth. "This is quite sweet," said Ben. "Excellent find." Of course, it was the poison that Molly had sweetened for herself originally that carried the flavor Ben detected. He handed the fork back to Molly as he swallowed. "Thank you, Molly," he said with a smile. "Don't thank me," said Molly coldly. "Thank Michael." "What?" asked Ben with a confused smile. "He is the one that told you it would be a good idea for the Council of Nine to sacrifice themselves, right?" asked Molly. Ben's eyes grew wide, and he noticed an unnatural weariness coming over him. "What have you done?" asked Ben. "I've saved the Council," said Molly. "I'm sorry, Ben. I thought we had a bond, but I cannot abide human sacrifice." You're the one with good intentions, laughed Ben as he dropped his fork. You tried to save the others. Yes, said Molly. I'm sorry you have to go, but my friends have a duty to protect against Archdemon's hand, not the Archdemon of your imagination. The real Archdemon is destroyed. Keep my key safe for the one who looks like Michael, pled Ben. And for what it's worth, I love you, Molly, and I forgive you. These were not the words of a delusional man under the influence of a demon. Molly tilted her head in confusion as Ben began using the last effort he could muster to sing. De colores, se visten los campos en la primavera. De colores, son los pajaritos que vienen de afuera. He continued trying to sing, but only notes and no words came out. After a few moments, a discomforting stillness settled over Ben, and Molly knew it was finished. Guilt and loneliness swelled up around her like an icy wind on an already cold day. A tear welled up in her eye as she hummed a few measures of De Colores to herself. She suddenly shook her head and stopped, convincing herself that no archangel would ask his chosen key-bearers to participate in human sacrifice. She looked up resolutely and breathed deeply, but a discomforting doubt began gnawing at the recesses of her consciousness, and after a few moments her eyes returned to the body of Ben Smith, the man that she had loved and then betrayed. He can't be right, she said to herself. He can't be right. She went to the lake's edge and splashed the cool, clear water on her face. She suddenly became aware of her mirrored key. I'll prove he wasn't right, she said to herself. She grabbed her key and her eyes began glowing. The blue tint of vision flooded her view, and she found herself watching her betrayal. She had been so confident as she put the poison into the food. She noticed how Ben looked at her and could not help but recognize the love in his eyes. A sinking feeling came over her, and her heart suddenly filled with doubt. He was right, whispered a voice behind her. She twisted around in horror to see Michael standing before her. No, whispered Molly. He was wrong. Time is on a course where the Archdemon will become free and reclaim what was taken from him by Sarah Hawkins and her demon lord allies, said Michael. Stop it, said Molly as tears welled up in her eyes. He wanted to sacrifice us. He was going to kill us. And to show him that was wrong, you sacrificed him? Asked Michael. His words cut deeply. Molly found breathing becoming increasingly difficult. No, I had to, gasped Molly as tears flowed out her eyes. No, said Michael calmly, but I knew that you would. Molly dropped to her knees. Why didn't you warn me? Whimpered Molly. You needed a warning not to betray and murder a man that showed love and kindness, asked Michael. And beside that, why did you not think to ask why the 10th key responded to your touch when you were not its bearer? It recognized a betrayer. Molly sobbed loudly as she buried her face in her hands. After a few minutes, Michael spoke again. I will tell you that the time is too soon to defeat the Archdemon, said Michael. Eventually a council will rise that will be prepared, that will truly understand the price of doing nothing. But humanity is not ready to produce such a council. What? Whimpered Molly. The reason I am telling you this is because I have an assignment for you, said Michael. An assignment of redemption. Molly wiped her eyes and tried to calm her sobs. I need you to build a shrine that will protect the 10th key for 1,000 years. How? Asked Molly. Gold in that hill will help purchase the materials and labor necessary, said Michael as he pointed to a hill. As Molly looked, shining veins of gold lit up. Keep it a secret from the others for now." "All right," agreed Molly at last. Over the next months, the eastern shrine was carved into the area near the lake. She had laborers dig deep and shape the natural caverns into great halls and chambers beneath the shrine. With numerous passageways, halls, and tunnels, she finally felt confident that she could keep Ben safe. She left his key on him and put him in a chamber, and then had it sealed off and the entrance hidden, just as Victor recalled. The laborers were confused by Molly's strange behavior, but the gold kept them working. Eventually, the shrine was completed. The laborers returned to their towns, and Molly stayed alone in her empty shrine. Guilt continued to gnaw at her, and eventually Levi Crawford detected the cloud of darkness that surrounded Molly and made his way to the eastern shrine. By the time he got there, Molly was having hallucinations. Levi tried to help her, but Molly's guilt was so intense that Levi's perception abilities became a weakness rather than a strength. His own mind was twisted with guilt that was not his own, and the memories Molly had of fire demon acolytes being consumed in fire flashed continually before him. Soon Levi began hallucinating that people were being similarly consumed in columns of fire all around him. Though he continued to attempt to help Molly, within days, sanity slipped away from Levi, and he could no longer discern reality from his horrific hallucinations. Molly still knew enough to realize that she had unintentionally harmed another of her friends. She arranged for him to be brought to Dr. Ethan McCarthy for treatment, and again retreated to her shrine in the east. She eventually purchased another bottle of the sweet green fluid with which she had poisoned Ben's last meal. She traveled to Phoenix and paid for rent in a room in a hotel for the evening. She watched the sun set out her window for the last time, but she felt only solitude. She quietly hummed a few measures of De Colores as she closed the curtains. Finally, she went to a quiet corner and looked up at the ceiling as though it were transparent. "Forgive me, Ben," she whispered. Tears welled up in her eyes. Please forgive me." She quickly swallowed the poison she had brought with her, closed her eyes, and let her life slip away.